It was 1:30 a.m. on a freezing December night. Johnny Carson had just finished taping The Tonight Show when he made a decision that would change a homeless veteran's life forever. But Johnny made sure no one would ever know about it, until now. December 18th, 1979. NBC Studios in Burbank was quieter than usual as the last of The Tonight Show crew packed up their equipment. Johnny Carson had just delivered another flawless performance to 20 million viewers, complete with his signature monologue, celebrity interviews, and that trademark smile that made America fall in love with him night after night. But as Johnny gathered his notes and prepared to head home to his Malibu mansion, he had no idea that outside in the freezing California winter, someone was watching the studio with desperate hope, someone whose life was about to intersect with his in the most unexpected way. The temperature had dropped to an unusual 28 degrees that night, and a harsh wind was cutting through the San Fernando Valley like a knife. Robert "Bobby" Martinez had been sitting on the concrete steps outside NBC Studios for 3 hours. At 42 years old, Bobby looked much older, his face weathered by years of living on the streets, his clothes layered but inadequate against the bitter cold. Bobby was a Vietnam veteran who had served 2 tours of duty before coming home to a country that didn't want to acknowledge what he'd been through. Like so many veterans of his generation, he'd struggled with what would later be recognized as PTSD, but in 1979 there was little understanding and even less help available. For the past 8 months, Bobby had been homeless, sleeping in doorways, under bridges, and when he was lucky, in shelters that were usually full. He survived on odd jobs, handouts, and the occasional meal from charitable strangers. But Bobby had a routine that kept him sane. Every Tuesday night, he would find a way to watch The Tonight Show, sometimes through store windows, sometimes in hospital waiting rooms, sometimes in the lobbies of hotels that hadn't yet noticed him. Johnny Carson's show was his connection to normalcy, his reminder that somewhere life was still functioning the way it was supposed to. Tonight Bobby had decided to get as close to that world as possible. He had walked the 12 miles from downtown Los Angeles to NBC Studios in Burbank, hoping to catch a glimpse of the magic that made his Tuesday nights bearable. Johnny Carson had finished his post-show routine, reviewing the next day's script with his producers, chatting briefly with the night's guests, and signing a few autographs for the studio crew's family members. It was now past 1:30 a.m., and Johnny was walking through the nearly empty parking lot toward his car when something caught his eye. There, huddled against the wind on the steps leading to the studio's main entrance, was a figure that didn't belong. Johnny's first thought was security. Had someone gotten past the guards? But as he got closer, he realized this wasn't an intruder, this was someone in trouble. Bobby Martinez was shivering uncontrollably, his thin jacket providing almost no protection against the cold. He had his arms wrapped around himself, and Johnny could see his breath in the frigid air. Most celebrities, if they noticed at all, would have kept walking. They would have assumed security would handle it, or they would have worried about their own safety. But Johnny Carson had grown up during the Great Depression. He remembered what desperation looked like, and more importantly, he remembered what kindness could mean to someone who had nothing. Johnny changed direction and walked toward the steps. "Hey there," Johnny said gently, not wanting to startle the man. "You okay?" Bobby looked up, and for a moment his face showed pure disbelief. Johnny Carson, the Johnny Carson, was standing in front of him, looking genuinely concerned. "Mr. Carson?" Bobby's voice was hoarse from the cold. I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to cause trouble. I just watch your show, you know. It helps." Johnny sat down on the step next to Bobby, ignoring the cold concrete, and his expensive suit. "What's your name?" Johnny asked. Bobby Martinez." He paused, then added with a mixture of pride and sadness, "U.S. Army 1st Infantry Division, Vietnam." Johnny nodded with respect. "Thank you for your service, Bobby. What brings you here tonight?" Over the next 20 minutes, in the parking lot of NBC Studios at nearly 2 a.m., Bobby Martinez told Johnny Carson his story. He talked about Vietnam, about coming home to a world that had moved on without him, about the nightmares that made it impossible to hold down regular work, and about the slow slide from temporary setbacks to living on the streets. Johnny listened without interrupting, without judging, without offering easy solutions that wouldn't actually solve anything. He just listened with the same attention he gave to his biggest celebrity guests. "I used to be somebody," Bobby said at one point. "I had a job, an apartment, a girl who was going to marry me, but when I came back, everything was different. I was different." "You're still somebody, Bobby," Johnny said quietly. "Being homeless doesn't change who you are inside." As they talked, Johnny learned that Bobby had been trying to get help through Veterans Affairs, but the system was overwhelmed and underfunded. He had been on waiting lists for months, for housing assistance, for job training, for the mental health support he desperately needed. When Bobby finished his story, Johnny Carson sat in silence for a moment. Then he did something that would have shocked his fans, his colleagues, and probably even his closest friends. "Bobby," Johnny said, "I want you to come with me." "What?" Bobby looked confused and a little frightened. "I'm not taking no for an answer," Johnny said, standing up. "You're freezing, you haven't eaten, and you're not spending another night on the streets. Not tonight." Bobby protested. He didn't want charity. He didn't want to be a burden. He just wanted to be left alone to figure things out on his own. But Johnny Carson could be surprisingly persuasive when he wanted to be. Johnny drove Bobby to a nearby hotel, not a fancy one that would attract attention, but a clean, decent place where Bobby could get warm, get clean, and get some sleep. Johnny paid for a week's stay, but he did more than that. He sat with Bobby in the hotel restaurant and made sure he had his first real meal in days. They talked for another hour, not about Vietnam or homelessness, but about normal things. Sports, music, what it was like to work in television. For those 2 hours, Bobby Martinez wasn't a homeless veteran. He was just a man having dinner with another man who happened to be famous. Before Johnny left that night, he did something else that Bobby would never forget. He gave Bobby his personal phone number. "I want you to call me in a week," Johnny said. "We're going to figure this out together." What Bobby didn't know, what no one knew for decades, was that Johnny Carson had been doing this for years. The homeless veteran outside NBC wasn't the first person Johnny had helped, and he wouldn't be the last. Johnny had quietly developed a network of contacts, social workers, veterans advocates, job placement specialists, and housing coordinators who could help people like Bobby navigate systems that seemed designed to defeat them. But Johnny never talked about it. He never mentioned it on his show, never used it for publicity, never let anyone know that America's favorite entertainer was also one of its most generous private citizens. Johnny had one rule: the people he helped had to want to be helped, and they had to be willing to work for it. He wouldn't just throw money at problems, but he would provide opportunities for people to rebuild their lives. Bobby Martinez called Johnny. Exactly 1 week later, Johnny arranged for him to meet with a veterans counselor who specialized in job placement. Within 2 weeks, Bobby had a job at a warehouse in Van Nuys, not glamorous work, but steady employment with benefits. Johnny helped Bobby get an apartment. Nothing fancy, but a clean, safe place that Bobby could afford on his new salary. More importantly, Johnny made sure Bobby got connected with other veterans who were successfully dealing with their own post-war challenges. Over the following months, Johnny would check in with Bobby regularly, not as a celebrity doing charity work, but as a friend who cared about another person's progress. For years, Bobby Martinez tried to figure out how to thank Johnny Carson publicly. He wanted to tell the world about Johnny's kindness, to let people know that their favorite talk show host was an even better human being than they imagined. But every time Bobby brought it up, Johnny would change the subject or make it clear that he didn't want any recognition. "Bobby," Johnny said during one of their phone conversations, "the best way to thank me is to help someone else when you get the chance. That's how this works." And Bobby did exactly that. As he rebuilt his life, he began volunteering at veterans centers, helping other homeless veterans navigate the systems that had once seemed impossible to him. What Bobby discovered, as he got more involved in helping other veterans, was that he wasn't alone. There were dozens of people, veterans, single mothers, elderly people, who had lost their savings, who had similar stories about Johnny Carson. They all had one thing in common. Johnny had sworn them to secrecy. He helped them rebuild their lives, but he never wanted credit for it. Marcus Williams, a single father who had lost his job and was about to be evicted, met Johnny in a coffee shop near the studio in 1981. Johnny not only helped Marcus keep his apartment, but connected him with a job at NBC that launched a 30-year career in television production. Elena Rodriguez, an elderly woman who had been scammed out of her retirement savings, caught Johnny's attention when she fainted from hunger outside a grocery store in 1983. Johnny not only made sure she had food and medical care, but helped her recover most of her stolen money through legal contacts he had cultivated. Each person had been sworn to secrecy. Each had been told the same thing. The best way to show gratitude was to help someone else. The truth about Johnny Carson's secret network of kindness might never have come to light, if not for a chance encounter in 1994, 2 years after Johnny had retired from The Tonight Show. Bobby Martinez was working as a veterans counselor by then, having earned his degree through a program that Johnny had quietly helped fund. Bobby was at a veterans conference in Los Angeles when he met Marcus Williams, who was there representing NBC's community outreach program. As they talked, both men realized they had something in common. They had both been helped by Johnny Carson, and they had both been sworn to secrecy. Over the next few months, Bobby and Marcus began quietly reaching out to others in the Los Angeles area who worked with homeless populations, veterans services, and community support organizations. What they discovered was remarkable. Johnny Carson had been running an informal but incredibly effective charitable network for over 15 years. He had helped hundreds of people, spent hundreds of thousands of his own dollars, and had created a ripple effect of kindness that touched thousands of lives. In 1997, when Johnny Carson was battling the emphysema that would eventually take his life, Bobby Martinez made a difficult decision. He knew Johnny wouldn't want public recognition, but Bobby also knew that Johnny's story needed to be told. Bobby reached out to Johnny one last time, asking for permission to share their story after Johnny passed away. Johnny's response was typically modest, but ultimately agreeable. "If you think it will help other people understand that they can make a difference," Johnny said, "then I guess that's okay. But wait until I'm gone. I don't want to deal with all the fuss while I'm still here." When Johnny Carson died in January 2005, Bobby Martinez and the dozens of other people Johnny had helped began to share their stories. The picture that emerged was of a man who had used his celebrity and wealth, not for personal gain, but to quietly transform lives. The Johnny Carson Foundation, which had been operating in secret since 1980, was revealed to have helped over 2,000 people transition from homelessness to stable housing and employment. The foundation had funded job training programs, provided emergency assistance, and created support networks that continued to help people long after Johnny's initial intervention. But the foundation was just part of the story. Johnny's real legacy was the culture of kindness he had created. The idea that helping others should be done quietly, consistently, and with the understanding that the goal was to help people help themselves. Today, the Bobby Martinez Veterans Resource Center in Van Nuys helps over 500 homeless veterans each year transition to stable housing and employment. The center operates on the principles Johnny Carson taught Bobby in that hotel restaurant in 1979. Treat people with dignity, provide opportunities rather than handouts, and help people rebuild their lives rather than just survive. Marcus Williams went on to create NBC's Community Heroes program, which has provided over $10 million in grants to grassroots organizations helping people in crisis. Elena Rodriguez, who lived to be 94, spent her final 20 years volunteering at senior centers and helping elderly people avoid financial scams. Each of them credited Johnny Carson not just with saving their lives, but with teaching them how to save others. In 2019, during renovations at the old NBC studios in Burbank, construction workers discovered a cache of old security footage from the late 1970s and early 1980s. Most of it was routine, employees coming and going, celebrities arriving for tapings, the usual business of a busy television studio. But scattered throughout the footage were glimpses of Johnny Carson's secret acts of kindness. Johnny talking to people outside the studio. Johnny helping someone to his car. Johnny sitting on steps in the middle of the night, clearly engaged in serious conversation with someone who was obviously in distress. The footage, grainy and silent, provided visual confirmation of what Bobby Martinez and others had been saying for years, that Johnny Carson had been quietly helping people for decades, always when he thought no one was watching. The story of Johnny Carson and Bobby Martinez reminds us that true kindness doesn't seek recognition. It doesn't require cameras or applause or public acknowledgement. It simply requires one person to see another person's humanity and to act on that recognition. Johnny Carson could have walked past Bobby Martinez that cold December night. He could have assumed that security would handle the situation, or that it wasn't his responsibility, or that he had done enough good by entertaining millions of people every night. Instead, he chose to sit down on a cold concrete step and listen to a stranger's story. That simple act of human connection changed Bobby's life, which in turn changed hundreds of other lives, which continues to change lives today. There's a plaque at the Bobby Martinez Veterans Resource Center that reads, "In memory of Johnny Carson, who taught us that true kindness is done in secret, and that the measure of a person is not what they accomplish in the spotlight, but what they do when no one is watching." Bobby Martinez, who is now 86 years old and still volunteers at the center that bears his name, keeps a framed photo on his desk. It's not a professional publicity shot of Johnny Carson. It's a grainy security camera image of Johnny sitting on the steps of NBC studios, talking to a homeless man on a cold December night. People remember Johnny for his jokes and his timing and his way with celebrities, Bobby says. But I remember him for the way he looked at me that night, not like I was a problem to be solved or a charity case to feel sorry for, but like I was a person worth listening to. That December night in 1979, Johnny Carson proved that the most powerful thing a person can do is simply treat another person like they matter. Everything else, the jobs, the housing, the new life, followed from that simple act of recognition. Johnny Carson spent 30 years making America laugh, but his real legacy might be the thousands of lives he changed by showing that laughter is good, but kindness is better. If this incredible story of secret kindness and the ripple effects of compassion moved you, make sure to subscribe for more amazing true stories about celebrities who use their fame to quietly change lives. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that they can make a difference, and let us know in the comments about a time when someone showed you unexpected kindness. Don't forget to hit that notification bell for more inspiring stories about the humanity behind the headlines.